What is the strangest mystery that is still unsolved? This is my favorite weird and barely known one. Back in 2013, an unknown group assaulted a power substation in California. By all appearances, it was pretty sophisticated. Scouted firing positions, all casings wiped of prints. They targeted transformers so they'd take time to overheat before triggering any alarms. Also knew exactly when the police would arrive. No suspect or motive to this day. They also cut some fiber optic cables in a vault nearby. Conspiracy types think it was a dry run by Russia or possibly China. To see how effective an attack like that might be, we now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. Who was Perseus? From 1943 to 1946, the Soviet Union had a high-level spy in the Manhattan Project. Codenamed Perseus, this spy was a scientist at the White Sands missile testing site in New Mexico, and the main research facilities in Los Alamos. Perseus saw pretty much the entire project start to finish, giving the Russians everything they needed to get to work on their own bomb. The fact that they were able to do so within 4 years of the end of World War II, when their nation was still devastated, is proof positive that Perseus helped a great deal. And to top it all off, Perseus was never caught or positively identified. Story 3. What on earth happened to the Tromp family? So it's this Australian family who owned a berry farm. Somehow, Mr. and Mrs. Tromp and their 3 grown kids developed the belief that they weren't safe, and they needed to flee their farm without cell phones or anything traceable, credit cards, etc. It sounds like the oldest son wasn't sold on whatever it was that led them to flee. He brought his phone, but eventually it got tossed from the car. He ended up bailing first and taking a train home. From there, the rest of the family slowly separated and suffered various degrees of emotional breaks. The 2 girls stole a car. Somehow they got separated and one made it home, but the other was found on the floor in the backseat of some guy's car in a catatonic state. He spotted her after he started down the road. Eventually, the parents were found wandering around aimlessly. Fortunately, they were all physically okay, but what happened? Was someone actually after them? Were they delusional? As far as I know, the family hasn't released any updates. This sounds like, you hear about carbon monoxide poisoning, but just on a large scale. Like this whole family just went nuts. Story 4. There are a few that bug me. The Solder children. Their house burned down in the middle of the night. Several of the kids were presumed dead, but their bodies were never found in the debris and it never burned hot enough to cremate them. It started to look extremely suspicious, and the parents until their deaths believed that they had been taken for some reason. Many years down the line, they did receive a photo and a cryptic note from someone claiming to be their son, but it was never authenticated. The boy in the box. A deceased little boy found beaten, recently shaved of his hair, and abandoned in the box of a bassinet that he was way too old for. The photos and reconstructions of him released to the public in the desperate hope of identifying him are haunting. The St. Louis Jane Doe. A little girl found in an abandoned house, decapitated and bound at the hands. They have no dental records or facial reconstruction to go from. The case has led to nowhere. She was just nameless, lost to time. Tri-State Crematory. A devastating case of a man called back from his college football career to take over his father's business when the father fell ill. Over time, people started noticing bodies and body parts on the grounds just hanging around. When someone finally took the report seriously, they found that he'd been piling bodies up randomly all over the property, often when it would have been much easier to cremate them instead of hauling them around to where they were dumped. The guy gave families canisters of cement dust instead of ashes. The mystery on this one is just why? The guy never gave up the answers to what happened there, and will only insist that there are no answers. His lawyer theorized that he had mercury poisoning from cremating amalgam fillings, but that doesn't really explain why you would dump a body instead of cremating it when the latter takes less effort. The West Memphis 3. All of the satanic panic mess obscured so much that will probably go unanswered now. A bloody man covered in mud stumbled into a Bojangles the night before those little boys went missing. Cops barely investigated that incident, and lost the blood evidence they did collect regarding it. What was going on with John Mark Byers and Terry Hobbs, 2 dads of 2 of those kids, both turning up with evidence and acting at different points like they may have been involved? Lars Middink, a German tourist on vacation in Bulgaria. He got into a fight, and the medical complications kept him from going home on a flight with his friends. Staying behind, it looks like his mental state unraveled completely over the course of just a few days, increasing paranoia, eventually culminating in his complete disappearance into a field of sunflowers. Story 5. The Overtoun Bridge. It's a bridge in Scotland where dogs always inexplicably jump off. It's very strange and nobody knows for certain why they do this. Dogs who survived reportedly walked back up and jumped off again. They even had to put up a warning sign to keep your dog on a leash and to watch them. A lot of theories say maybe it's because of certain scents or animals down below, but most people have disagreed with this theory. It's just friggin' weird. Story 6. The Salish Sea Feet, or the Mad Axeman of New Orleans. The Salish Sea Feet are the approximately 20 dismembered feet found in or around British Columbia or Washington, USA. The feet sometimes are found still inside of shoes. No one knows how they got there or where they came from. Over the course of the last 13 years, the authorities have ruled out foul play. The Mad Axeman of New Orleans ran rampant in 1918 and 1919. He murdered 6 people, usually those of Italian descent, with axes or straight razors. In March of 1919, he sent a lengthy letter from Hottest Hell that was pretty nonsensical, but the most relevant paragraphs read, now to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I'm going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared, in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. There were no murders that night because every dance hall in NOLA was filled to capacity. No shot this guy actually said jazz it out in 1919, right? That feels like a really modern way of saying things. Also, the feet thing is weird. I haven't heard of it and I live in British Columbia. I still got my feet, so I'm in the clear. Story 17. The Kongka La Pass in Ladakh. This region lies in the disputed border of India and China and is truly the most inaccessible place in the world. In 1962, the armies of both the countries were engaged in a severe conflict. After this, both China and India entered into an agreement, according to which none will be allowed to patrol the region, but can keep an eye on it from a distance. After this, a popular belief floated that the Kongka La Pass in Ladakh is a hideous base of UFOs. The area has forever remained a no-man's land due to its territorial limits, and is the reason why the UFOs have chosen it as their operational base. Reportedly, many have seen these UFOs, and both the Indian and Chinese governments are aware of these developments. In 2006, Google Maps too baffled the world with some images that looked like military facilities. But to date, the whole issue remains mysterious and unexplainable. Story 8. The Circleville Letters. In 1976, residents of the small city south of Columbus, Ohio, began receiving handwritten letters sinister and graphic. Each letter included secret and dark details about their personal lives. One resident received a ton of letters accusing her of various unsavory acts. The author warned the resident that he had been keeping an eye on her home, as well as her comings and goings. The resident was horrified and tried to keep the letters a secret until her husband began receiving them as well. The attacks on the family continued, with large posters appearing around town spreading rumors about their 12-year-old child. One day in 1977, the husband left the house after receiving a call from who he thought was writing the letters. A few minutes later, the husband was found dead at the end of the street, dead behind the wheel. The sheriff had ruled it a homicide when he realized that a single shot had been fired before the accident, but there was no evidence that the husband was shot at the site. The sheriff found the husband was twice the legal limit and ruled it a drunk driving accident. The letters began again, this time accusing the sheriff of covering up the true nature of the death. The letters also accused the sheriff of mishandling an investigation into the county coroner, who had been accused of other grotesque acts. The harassment continued, this time with signs along the road, and in 1983, the original resident who had been accused of having an affair pulled over to remove a sign. During the effort to remove the sign, she discovered a box was attached, and inside of it was a small pistol. The gun was part of a booby trap designed to fire when the sign was removed. Paul Fresher was arrested and given 25 years. But one small problem. The letter writing continued even after Fresher was put in jail. In a new batch of letters, the author had promised to dig up the grave of a deceased baby and mail the bones to the police in the case of another potential affair turned murder. Hundreds of residents continued to receive personal letters until 1994 when everything stopped. The personal aspect of this one really freaks me out. I hate that. Receiving really personal letters that are extremely threatening from this anonymous source, who clearly seems to have, intent to harm you? Pretty freaky. Not a fan. Story 9. A strange but not creepy mystery. the disappearance and reappearance of Lawrence Joseph Bader. He was a cookware salesman from Akron, Ohio, who went missing in 1957. He went fishing, a storm hit, and his boat was found the next day with some damage. He was in debt and in trouble with the IRS, and his wife was about to have their third child. 4 days later, John Fritz Johnson appeared in a bar in Omaha, Nebraska. Spoiler, it's Larry Bader. Fritz was known for his wild personality. He attracted local attention for sitting atop a flagpole for 30 days to raise money for polio. He became a radio announcer and a TV sports director. He drove around in a hearse with a bar and became a minor celebrity in Omaha. By no means was avoiding attention. In 1964, a cancerous tumor was found behind his left eye and it had to be removed. In 1965, Fritz was in Chicago for a tournament, and an acquaintance from Akron recognized him despite the eye patch and confronted him, and then brought Bader's niece to take a look. She agreed it was her uncle and confronted him about it as well. Fritz denied it, but found it humorous. Fritz's fingerprints were then matched to Larry Bader's military records and it was confirmed. Fritz Johnson always maintained that he had no memory of his former life as Larry Bader. Psychiatrists examined him and believed that he was telling the truth, even though he did have financial reasons to assume a new identity. And the concept of someone forgetting their past and entirely constructing a different one with false memories is hard to fathom. It is also considered a possibility that the eye tumor had something to do with it. He ultimately died in 1966 from the tumor, and it was never determined conclusively whether he was lying or not. I am fascinated by this case, especially because he had an entire change in personality and an entire life backstory as Fritz, and he made no effort to live a low-profile life to avoid discovery. I found this case while looking through the Wikipedia category of people who have faked their own deaths, though it's debatable if this guy should even be on there, all of which are great stories. Story 10. The Oakville Blob. In 1994, there was a rainstorm in Oakville, Washington. Only the raindrops were a strange, clear substance that had the consistency of Jell-O. Lots of people experienced flu-like symptoms after coming into contact with it, and people's dogs and cats all over the city were dying. When a local hospital ran a lab test on the substance after one of the patients suggested it, it was found that whatever this mysterious rain was, it had human white blood cells in it. Sometime after that, a sample was also sent to the Washington State Health Laboratory, where it was being researched by epidemiologist Mike McDowell. After he determined that it was man-made or speculated that it was some sort of matrix for transporting viruses and bacteria, the samples suddenly went missing from the containment facility, and his supervisor told him to not ask any questions. There are no known samples of the stuff anywhere today, despite being sent to several different facilities by various Oakville residents. So yeah, I would personally say that this was clearly some sort of bioweapon test run, but by whom? I would like to give the US government the benefit of the doubt here and assume it wasn't us testing something like that on our own citizens. But if it wasn't, why would it have been covered up like that? Also, even if it being a bioweapon seems super obvious, how the heck did whoever dispensed it manage to make it rain over an entire city for several days? Story 11. On April 19th, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murray Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The explosion unalived 168 in what was the deadliest terrorist attack on the United States until 9/11. To date, it still remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the country. One of the lesser-known things about this is the case of the missing leg. Investigators discovered the leg laying among the rubble and identified it belonging to Lakeisha Levy. The only problem was, she'd already been buried with both of her legs. She was exhumed. Her severed leg was placed in her coffin, while the other leg was taken to the FBI laboratory for identification. Since it had been embalmed, a DNA sample was unable to be obtained. The extra left leg, which had been mistakenly buried with Levy, is suspected to belong to an unidentified 169th victim, whose body had mostly disintegrated in the blast. This has led people to suspect that there was an additional terrorist involved, even though perpetrators Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been convicted, with 2 others later identified as accomplices. So, who was the possible additional bomber? They still remain unidentified now, 25 years after the attack. Story 12. The Winchester Mystery House. I watched a documentary on this house when I was 10, and it has stuck with me ever since. It's about a woman named Sarah Winchester. Her husband owned a rifle company, and she went to a psychic. The psychic told her that she is being haunted by the ghosts of all the people who have died by the hands of those guns, and that is the reason for the tragedy in her life. To appease the spirits, the psychic told her to build a great house for them, and she was not allowed to stop building or tragedy would strike again. She didn't get help from anyone, but she did it and kept building for the next 38 years. There are stairs that lead to nowhere, windows that don't look out, hallways that wrapped around. It has 161 rooms and is huge. Was it really the ghosts? Was she insane? I have no idea, but it's the most interesting story I've ever read. I thought that psychics' whole thing was that they were purposefully vague like horoscopes or whatever so that everyone could relate to what they were going to say. Or they were just really good at picking up clues from different things like what the person was wearing or whatever. This seems very specific. Build a house? I don't know what this psychic's endgame was, or you know what? Maybe there were just spirits. Who am I to say? Story 13. I remember seeing a video about a woman that after getting divorced started getting stalked and assaulted in her own house. Every time police would arrive, no one other than her was at the scene. Sometimes she would appear with bruises. Once, she appeared with a screwdriver through her hand. This happened so many times that police started ignoring her after the investigation on her husband, and on the case left no suspects. 3 months later, she disappeared, just to reappear next to a highway in the middle of the desert, miles away from her house, with her hands tied and dead. Autopsy later confirmed that she was beaten to death. Creepiest crap I know. Story 14. Didn't see it anywhere while scrolling. I'll say the disappearance of Andrew Gosden. He was a British 14-year-old boy with excellent marks, no absences, and apparently really intelligent. One day, he went out of the house to go to school, but instead of going, he waited in a public park for his parents to leave, then went back and took some affairs. Money, changed clothes, he had a uniform, he put on a Slipknot shirt, and his PSP without the charger. He then went to the train station and went to London. The last video existing of him was at the train station. Apparently, the ticket seller tried to sell him a back ticket for only £1 more, but Gosden refused. The idea was that maybe he wanted to go see the Muse concert that was happening in London this day or week. Later, the group helped publicize the campaign for searching. He was never seen again since that day. No one knows if he's dead, if he planned to come back, he had no coat, no vest, and he didn't take his passport. Rumor has it that he wanted to try to change life like in a movie. He was fond of The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin, in which the main character fakes his death to start a new life. It happened in 2007, so he's 27 today. In 2 days, actually. His birthday is July 10th. Some people think they've seen him. There are reconstructions of what he would look like, but no one really knows what happened to him. The parents have left the bank account with a lot of money in case he would need it, but he never withdrew anything except for the £100 of the day he disappeared. I know that his birthday is probably not common knowledge, but you can look it up somewhere. But I like to imagine that OP knew that and no one else does, and OP might be this missing kid. Just a fun little headcanon for me.